Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of Smart Buildings Week.
He wants to talk about the snow belt tree if you want to talk to him about it.
We appreciate it. My name is Stan Price, and I'm joined by my colleague at the Smart Buildings Center, Britton Reif, who you don't see on your screen here, but is helping us control the Zoom technology today. So we appreciate your attendance. A couple of housekeeping things before I get into introducing our moderators and panels today. First off, just to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be available for free access on the Smart Buildings Center's YouTube channel in a week or two. So if you want to go back for reference or look at any of the material that's presented today, it will be made available to you. I would say that most all attendees are probably very familiar with the Zoom platform. And if so, you do recognize the fact that your camera and your microphone have been disabled. But that doesn't mean that your ability to talk to us and ask questions has been disabled. Please use the question and answer dialog box to send along any questions that you have throughout the presentation today. We'll be actively monitoring that box and try to deal with specific questions that you have. Note that the chat box is not enabled for you, so please don't send the questions via chat. That won't work. Please use the question and answer dialog box. I do want to make special mention of our event sponsors. We couldn't pull off Smart Buildings Week without their support. So I want to make sure and thank at the outset Microsoft as our title sponsor, as well as McKinstry and Seattle City Light, Puget Sound Energy, DB Engineering, Long Building Technologies, McDonald Miller, ATS Automation, the Seattle King County chapter of BOMA, as well as the Washington State Department of Commerce and BELIMO. Thanks to each one of our sponsors for helping make this a reality. So with that, it's my pleasure actually to introduce today's moderator. He's a longtime friend and industry veteran at the McKinstry Company, Rick Cochran, who's going to ably lead our discussion today. And so, Rick, I'll hand it over to you to do a little intro and to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Stan. Let me just bring up the presentation here. All right. Am I good to go?
You are.
All right. Thanks very much. Appreciate everyone joining us today. My name is Rick Cochran. I'm with McKinstry in Seattle with our technical services team. Technical services provides a suite of services all focused on facility performance optimization. That includes commissioning and retro commissioning, facility assessments and capital planning, data acquisition analytics, and master systems integration, among others. Fair enough to say that I know just enough about building operations at just about all aspects to be dangerous. And really, I consider myself more of a handler and agent for the technical specialists who really know what they're doing. So I'm very honored to be hosting this panel today, and really my real value is asking the right questions. So here's the teaser. The first 2 sessions of Smart Buildings Exchange Week were very compelling. I hope you got to participate in those. The first day was really on how do we re-engineer the design process to actually achieve the promise of smart buildings? Phenomenal session. Yesterday was focused on getting outside of the building boundaries and focusing on grid optimization. Another phenomenal session. What's missing here? Well, it's the same thing that's usually missing in just about every building conversation, which is the voice of the operator. So the panel today is focused on how do we bring the promise of smart buildings and technology to operations teams? How do we bring operations teams forward in the design process? How do we make technology available to operations teams? Buildings are complex systems comprised of many proprietary hardware and software systems, but ultimately they're run by people, and we don't think that's going to change substantially in the near future. The job of operating buildings gets more challenging every year. Part of that is due to mandates and new laws and legislation. around resource conservation. Part of that is the increasing nature of building complexity with new technologies. And then there's, of course, human resource constraints. Smart buildings are touted as the future of the built environment, and funding is dramatically increasing in this subsector, but reality isn't really matching up. We're not seeing corollary gains in operational efficiency or high performance. And we think that's because operations teams are left out of these conversations. There's little attention being paid to help facilities operators take advantage of these technologies and transition. That's the important key here, to whatever the future will be. So today we're focusing this session on the nexus of building operations and technology, how to bring operations into the smart buildings framework, how to help operators take steps toward the promised land of technology in service of high performance facilities. So to get your brains firing, because it's Wednesday, hump day, and the smoke might be addling your thinking, we've got 2 poll questions, and I'm just going to encourage you to, these are rapid fire, don't overthink it. As soon as the question comes up, please just read quickly through, select your best, and then we'll show the results. So Britton, if you could, please bring up the first. Did that work?
She's working on it.
Okay.
Yes, people are voting, so you all may
good.
not see it as panelists now, but we're getting some responses in.
Okay, let's give it another 15 seconds. All right, and I can't see the results right now. The good news is that everyone's right. You get a participant medal.
Great. When you close out the poll, Britton, can you give us a summary of how those percentages broke out?
There we go.
Oh, wow.
Great.
Fascinating. Okay. Should I close that out?
Let's see, I can close it here.
Okay. Very interesting. All right, thanks everybody. So the second poll question, everyone probably recognizes the familiar Gartner hype scale. This is a version of it developed by McKinstry, anticipating the future of technology in the built environment. So it's a little bit of a hybrid between some of the existing Gartner hype scales focused on the digital workplace, smart office, or construction 2.0. So again, rapid fire. We've tried to categorize what we think are the key operations topics specific to smart buildings. Go ahead and bring up the second poll, Britton, please. And again, rapid fire, please respond. We'll give about 20 seconds. All right. Very cool. Huh. Again, you're all right, but this is really compelling. Okay, thanks. All right, let's dig in. Let's see. Am I still advancing? Can everybody see the mugs?
Yes.
All right, today we're joined by 3, I'll say, facilities operations heroes. Roy Buchert from Kaiser Permanente. Roy is the energy manager for the Pacific Northwest based out of Renton. Mike Kowalik, who is a senior program manager at my firm, McKinstry, but today is representing the South Landing project in Spokane, which is designed to be the largest zero carbon building in the US, and it has a grand opening tomorrow. And Norm Mentor, who is an assistant director of facilities at the University of Washington, and has run both the minor capital programs and the resource conservation management program there. Again, heroes of operations. I'm not going to go into great detail on their bios. Let's get into the meat of the presentation. All right, so what we're going to do is first talk about the problem statement about what is the disconnect between smart building technology and operations. Then we'll get into some root cause analysis, and then we'll really focus on the way forward, some ways to address the disconnect, and a couple of case studies. So first off, I feel like technology selection is difficult in any event, and finding plug and play or interoperable platforms is impossible still. So there's confusion on how to design, evaluate, and roll out end-to-end solutions. And I think most people agree that building operators can't succeed if developers, architects, engineers, and builders aren't on the same page with operators. So let's get at, first of all, if we're talking about the disconnect between technology and operations, let's get at what it is that operations teams actually need. So first question, what are your greatest concerns in operating buildings and managing facilities, assets, and teams? Mike, you want to start?
Yeah. I'm most concerned about diverging expectations and reality in the buildings. I think for a long time, the buildings have always needed to be, I think, warm, safe, dry, warm, safe, dry, warm, safe, dry. They say that over and over. That's the occupant expectation. I think we might more recently add to that clean, better, healthier air than what we get outside. And now what's getting more complicated is smart. People are having smart cars and smart homes, smart water. I mean, the expectation for what the building is capable of doing is increasing. At the same time, the complexity of the systems is increasing. The reliability and longevity of those systems is not necessarily increasing at the same pace. So there's this divergence of expectations from our occupants in the buildings and what the building itself is capable of. And I think if you add to that this aging workforce, we unfortunately have building operators who carry forward a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge moving on to retirement or next phase in their lives. We've got a lot of institutional knowledge walking out of the door. So I think the problem is intensifying in a lot of ways. I think we're entering a pretty big transitional period for how we operate buildings.
Thank you. Roy, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think I want to just sort of hook on to what Mike was sharing with everyone in that, I think my greatest concern is really understanding in real time what's happening, or in some cases what's not happening, in our buildings and how it's impacting the operations and the energy consumption of the building. Oftentimes, it's a lot of work to find out what's happening, and oftentimes it happens when the energy bill shows up or some other event happens, and you're always sort of behind the 8 ball, if you will, in terms of change. So for me, it's having real-time visibility to understand what's happening in operations, what's happening with the equipment, and with the assets, as well as the teams that manage all of that work.
Super, thanks. Norm, what do you got?
Yeah, at the University of Washington, it's the same thing. We have 14 million square feet and $38 million worth of utilities flowing through the buildings every year, and yet there are 1,000-person utility operations maintenance staff. 10 of them are HVAC technicians, right? And my team is 3 energy engineers. So out of those 13 people take care of 14 million square feet. It's really about competency and capacity training and getting our folks, somebody told me that complexity is really just a synonym for I don't understand, right? If we can get our operations staff to understand smart buildings, then we've got a chance to maintain and operate them.
Super, thank you. All right, second question. When it comes to building technology applications, at this point, are you seeing them as a benefit or a burden for operational and energy efficiency? Let's start with Roy.
I really see that as being a benefit, but a caveat to that is it's got to be done in the right way. So, based upon the amount of data that we can get these days, it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, and that was shared with, I think that was sort of a common theme through both former sessions this week. But how do you distill that down into the essential things that personnel need to know? And while we have some systems that I think do that very well, and I'll share that a little bit later in the presentation from our perspective, there's a lot of systems out there that just, you know, need some work, right, for it to be able to be optimized for our operational folks to react to and to work with.
Great, thank you. Norm, benefit or burden?
Oh, it's absolutely a benefit, you know, and it's up to us as operators to solve that riddle of how to leverage technology. Those 10 technicians are never going to, you know, turn into 100 that we optimally would need, right? So we've got to use technologies to get the job done. And as Roy said, it's all about getting to the actionable data. There's a ton, the technology can overwhelm you in a hurry. So we've got to distill it down to what's really actionable for our technicians.
Great. Mike, bring us home in this section.
Yeah, so I totally agree. I think the benefit's clear. I would argue there's a short-term burden. Question is, how long is it going to last? I do think, you know, a few decades from now, we'll look back and chuckle at having too much data being overwhelming in the building, especially with the amount of data we may have flowing at that point. But the pain's real. I mean, you know, point of promise, something I get encouraged by is looking at the industrial space. If you look at, you know, how Boeing or BNSF operate their facilities, you've got things like Rockwell automation and PLC controllers that have been pretty sophisticated since the 80s. And I think the difference between that and commercial buildings is the economic incentives. If the line goes down at Boeing, that's a lot more expensive than if an air handler goes offline in one of our buildings. And so those incentives are going to become more pressing as we move forward and as the data gets easier to work with, but the pain's real right now.
Great. Got to follow up on that, but I'll hold off. Gabe, any questions that we should field from participants?
No questions so far, so a reminder to please submit questions. We'll be pausing throughout to answer them, but we're good for now.
I'll put a placeholder in. If we have time at the end, speaking of to Mike's point about incentives, especially financial incentives, it'll be interesting to see if new stringency around space conditions related to infectious disease control and potentially longer fire season or outdoor air issues is a catalyst for that. So let's get into root causes. At times, it definitely feels like the building sector, and in particular, the building technology subsector, that they're more siloed than ever. And it's certainly a stretch to say that silver bullet solutions will deliver the promise of smart buildings in the near term. So let's examine this disconnect between the promise of tech and the reality of operations. So first question, maybe a little bit vague, but it's as good as I could do in terms of trying to stimulate some investigation here. What is the current state of system operability? Big question, but try and keep it tight. Mike, go ahead.
It's not good. I'm generally an optimist, but I'm a little frustrated, candidly, about just the state of interoperability in the industry. I do think it's improving, but you know, trying to get to the root cause, Rick, to your point here. You think about the use cases, like why would you ever plug one system into another? They're just not that crisp. They're not that well developed compared to, let's say, a lighting control system. You know, I know I need that building to dim lights up or down. I need the lights to maybe work with, you know, different color tuning or whatever it is you need to do. But things like that needs to link to the roller shade system, or that should be integrated with the AV system or tie into the HVAC control system so I can scene set. That's new. We haven't been doing that for a long time. And I think these you know, interoperable use cases could be cleaner. And I think as they get cleaner, the kind of options we'll have to advance integration and interoperability will get a lot better.
Great. Norm?
Well, you know, I echo Mike's thoughts. What we see, and let me start with this example. What we see with new buildings coming off the assembly line, we at the University of Washington receive about 100,000 square feet of new space every year. And we don't see the buildings coming online in a well-commissioned and operational manner. And it's getting worse the smarter the buildings get. So I think if our technology partners can understand how low the bar is among our trades and construction teams, if we continue to live in our buildings like our IT systems don't come online until 30 days after substantial completion, we've got no chance of integrating the technology that's coming into every one of the smart systems in our buildings in a way that allows our contractors to be successful. So we've got just a lot of work to do on the operational side to move left to meet our contractors where they are at the time they're in our buildings.
Great. Roy, current state.
Yeah, I agree with both Mike and Norm in that, in terms of interoperability, we're really still at the beginning of the journey, if you will. I think we've all experienced and have devices and things in our lives, such as the iPhones and even our laptops and computer systems that are plug and play these days. And that's set the bar in terms of expectations for these other more complex, sophisticated systems. So I believe the awareness is out there, but it's taking some time to transition from the traditional systems that are proprietary to something that is, exposing some of the information that you've got to get some programmers, involved to sort of harvest that information, to do something else with it. So that's where we're at right now. And I think our expectation is that things do become fully plug and play, and that, as an owner, you have the ability to go out and find the best in class of whatever it is you're looking for that adds value to your company, and just be able to plug and play that with all the other systems you have currently in the building.
That's great. Do you kind of follow on from that? Do any of you feel that you are in control of the vendor market or the technology market, or are you at their mercy?
We're at the UW, we're certainly trying to turn that dynamic on its head. It's very easy to become at the mercy of the vendor. We've had many buildings come online, and the vendor for, say, lighting controls is asking for a server, 3 servers, proprietary software, a hole in our IT infrastructure so that they can manage the system from the cloud. And we are looking around for an old Windows machine under somebody's desk. That's the state of our operation, if you will. So the disconnect is huge. And so we've spent a lot of time in the last 18 months standing up standard specifications and going back to the old school campus required standard specifications for technology and no exceptions allowed kind of attitude. So there's a bit of retracting right now in the industry, actually.
We've seen a lot with, very valid IT concerns around security, right? And working with those teams and those experts to figure out a way that still maintains all of that, but allows that two-way communication, right? So we can leverage the cloud. We don't have to have these go back a step or two and set up buildings with isolated systems, right? So there's a lot of work that has been done there, but there's still a long ways to go.
Good.
Yeah, and Rick, maybe just to add to that, I'm wearing a couple different hats here thinking about this question, but from an owner perspective, I do think there is more power than we tend to think from an owner perspective and what it is we ask for and expect our vendors and platform providers to do. The analogy I keep thinking about is like, it just drives me crazy personally that I can't buy a cell phone with a battery that lasts more than a day. But that's because for so long, we've only cared about the quality of the camera and, you know, how good is the screen and how big is it and that kind of stuff. And the industry hasn't demanded that we have batteries that last more than a day. And I think we've got similar phenomenon happening in our buildings where we tend to get excited about the flashy dashboards and the graphics and not as excited about a really robust plenum rated network switch, right? Or some kind of like backnet management system.
Right. So true.
Great. Well, not a surprise that we're attracted to the flashy object as opposed to, I guess, functionality. Well, you've all addressed really sort of my second question here, but I'll just ask if there's anything you want to add around why the building sector is lagging so far behind others in using technology to achieve efficiencies. I think everyone I know has used the McKinsey graphic in a presentation in the past 2 years that shows gross productivity since World War II across different economic sectors, and you know, you see 1,500% productivity gains in sectors such as information and manufacturing, and the only 3 sectors that are flatlined or negative in terms of productivity growth are the 3 that I care most about: education, healthcare, and buildings. So, you know, if the promise is there around applying technology to see gains and solve all these problems, like, freeform here for me, you know, what might be some additional root causes that we can start to hone in on as industry leaders? Mike, go ahead.
I love a question. We could have a whole week just talking about this one. You know, a couple things. I think, one, the opportunity is huge. If you're a startup or some company looking to figure out what industry you're going to go tackle, the built environment and the trends over the last few years it's a big opportunity on paper. So it's really tempting to go after it. But I think the approaches tend to be a bit myopic in that they don't appreciate the complexity of the nuts and bolts on the ground and run into a bunch of challenges when they get into the building. Another challenge, I think, is the way we develop buildings. I mean, a plot of land may have dozens, even hundreds of different companies touch it with a pretty disparate ownership pattern throughout that time. So the expectation that what walks out of that convoluted, long drawn out process is one integrated, interoperable building, you know, maybe doesn't appreciate the challenges that presents. And then the last thing I want to mention is just that it feels like in the last decade, there's been a tremendous amount of development, you know, that called the IoT boom or what have you, but there's a whole bunch of new technology that's really exciting that just crashed headfirst into this old procurement system. Construction is a really old industry. Operations is just as old. And it's just new technology running into brick wall after brick wall until we figure it out. And I think Rory's point earlier about we're still in the early days of this, and you know, first, second gen DDC operations in the building, I think over time we'll get a lot better. But there's definitely some big challenges.
Yeah, to follow on that, you know, we in the public sector especially are slow to adapt to real estate as a portfolio of invested assets, but we're moving that direction. And until we connect the operational cost of energy in our buildings, especially in HVAC systems, 50% of the cost of the system is realized through energy during its useful life. So as we begin to connect that cost and that potential savings to the first cost investment, but also to the technology that's going to monitor that system throughout its life, and our ability to be able to manage that system effectively actually can pay for the monitoring and the management of that system through simple energy savings by keeping the system optimized. As the light bulb goes on in higher ed and healthcare and in the public sector in general, that this stuff pays for itself. It's about changing our financial systems So unfortunately, or fortunately, technology can help us illustrate that and make that clear to our CFOs. And we got to leverage that technology's ability to connect the dots financially.
You know, Norm, and I think, you know, to further move things along, we're seeing states like the state of Washington pass regulation on energy efficiency targets for existing building fleets, right? So there's pressure coming in from all sides to try to move this along faster and further than it ever has been. We're going to need to have this technology, and they're going to have it working very well in order to meet some of these new regulations as they're being adjusted every 5 years with downward moving EUI targets. So, you know, I think things are starting to come together. You know, there's more hands pushing that flywheel, if you will, and I think we'll start to see the momentum pick up and get us further along the line here of this journey that we're on.
That's great. Thank you, guys. We're going to move along. Gabe, I think I see a couple of questions.
You've got a couple questions coming in. The first, hoping to get thoughts on troubleshooting operations and communications with system interoperability. The asker made a comment about it can be made more complicated since there are typically multiple parties involved, and figuring out where the issues reside takes more effort to determine and direct. So hoping to get some thoughts from the panelists on that side.
That's a good question. I actually think we're going to address it in the next section in the way forward.
Yeah.
So let's hold off on that. Is there anything else, Gabe?
I think that's it for the immediate ones, and we'll hold the rest for the end as well.
Great. So we call this the way forward. You know, we've just sort of been into the depths of despair in identifying some of the challenges, but there's a lot to look forward to and a lot to be optimistic about. And certainly, you know, one of the reasons that we have the folks on the panel today is that, you know, we're iteratively testing and proving some concepts around this. And again, these are not silver bullets, but we're making progress. And I think that's the key, is figuring out how to help all boats rise and help operations teams just take steps toward the future, not solve everything at once. So, you know, in thinking more about operations and tech applications, number one, there doesn't seem to be a universally accepted definition of what a smart building is or does. That's changing. There are some standards being developed by some very compelling industry organizations, including on the telecommunications front. But what I'm most interested in for this panel is the notion that smart buildings might be advanced by different ways of using existing technology rather than holding out for some promised new way. I read an article that posited that the quality of user experience is actually of greater value than flashy technology. Mike, you alluded to this, that functionality, lower cost, and element of fun are crucial for user adoption. So just trying to seed some ideas around, you know, what is working, what can operators do today, and what is the way forward? What can people who are participating on this do today and tomorrow to take steps? So the first question is really, is there a different way of being than today's sort of somewhat frustrating operational reality, rather than waiting for the future? So and again, we've got a bunch of questions here in this section, so let's make it fairly rapid fire. Mike, you want to go?
Yeah, different way of being or doing. I think we tend to approach the building like a utility. Keep it warm, safe, dry, smart, happy, whatever you want it to be at this point. But I think there's another way to think about it as a toy. I mean, stuff with gamification right now is getting really interesting. And if you're frustrated that your occupants aren't moving throughout the building, you know, create a game. Put a little Pokemon Go thing in the building and have them go walk across the building a couple times a day to make it a little more interactive. Or create a point system where you gain points for turning off the lights or turning your set point down or that kind of stuff. Make it fun. I think there's a lot of opportunities to make it a lot more interesting.
Interesting. Norm?
Well, keep it simple is so important to us. Let's look at what's really most important to our users, and let's not worry about all the noise. Is one of our best strategies that we can use. It's big data. That doesn't mean we need to act upon it all. Let's act upon the most impactful bits. Yeah.
That's great. Roy?
I think, the simplification, I would echo that. I think keeping things, with the user in mind, how do you make it easy and intuitive for them to understand that there's an issue and what they could be doing about that issue or should be doing about that issue, I think is key to early adoption. And I also think a phased approach, right? You don't have to go deep. It doesn't have to be everything or nothing. How do you start in a way to get people familiar with, help them to understand, and help them start to embrace the logic and the technology, so that they're saying, hey, I want more.
Right.
Great. So what can we do differently with the technology that we have? Thinking more about like process than technology. And I'm not thinking about like buildings that still have pneumatic controls. I'm thinking about, fairly modern systems, but just doing things differently with what we have. Can we, and what are the barriers to doing that?
Yeah, I think we need to look at the system as a two-way and a matrix dynamic system. That's what's been, traditionally we've looked at it as a one-way system from the owner operator down to the user. By looking at this as the ability to people to interact with the system and actually extract things like energy and data and knowledge and user preferences back to the system so that the utility or the owner is actually responsive to the users, and we're actually reusing what information and data and energy they can give back to us for other purposes.
Roy?
One of the things that we've been doing different that we can do today without having to wait for a lot of technology and things to fall in place is we've started to deploy fault detection and diagnostics analytics software that sits in the cloud. It's quick to connect it to the building. It's one way out only in terms of the data. But with those simple approaches, we're able to do quite a bit of things relatively cost effectively and provide several different levels of information for our building owners as building owners to the building. So for our engineering folks, there might be a very simple approach to help them understand what is going wrong, how that's monetized, prioritized, and what they should be doing about it. From my perspective as energy manager, I've got data I can drill down into and look for trending and other things. So that's something that we've been doing that we can do today cost effectively that starts us on that journey.
Super. Mike?
Yeah, totally agree. I think there's an opportunity to just capitalize the data extraction cost. I mean, any of these things that require data for fault detection, data for meter management, data for predictive maintenance, or anything, even just like trying to get performance dashboard in the building, you're going to need the data, and that's always the most expensive part. So to burden any one of the individual solutions with that cost misses the opportunity to just have the end of a project put some effort into getting all the data consolidated in one place. I think the industry largely calls it fourth utility. It's the data, it's really valuable, but there's an opportunity to capitalize that initially and bring the cost down for everything else downstream.
Great. Next question, what do you think the role of the human system is in optimizing building operations? Mike?
Yeah, really critical. I mean, buildings are humans, period. Imagine trying to build an airplane autopilot system without thinking about what the co-pilot or the pilots in the plane are going to do. Like, you need humans in the system, and the things they can do that the controls that systems cannot do is understand the sentiment and the emotion. They can sense when the sensors break. They they know the look and feel, and just have the human connection to drive the boat. So the idea that you're ever going to get rid of them or operate some critical environment without a pilot seems far-fetched to me. I don't think we dedicate enough time to understanding what their role is and how to get the most out of them, or how to enrich their experience or move them to a higher order task.
Roy?
You know, to echo on something Norm had said earlier, we need to have the human involved in the equation, but we'll never have enough resources for them to do that 24/7, 365 monitoring, right? Or to do the full-blown analytics. So it seems to me that automating those things and leveraging the technology to do that part of it that we just can't do well as humans, and then allowing them to have easy access and understanding of those systems and the outcomes of the analytics. But at the end, they're the ones that are going to have to do something with that information, right? So it's critical that they're still trained, that they're knowledgeable. But that, you know, the technology helps solve this resource, one of the resource issues we're having in that. You'll never get enough people to do everything you need to do. So how do you leverage that technology to make the most of your resources and deploy those resources as effectively as possible?
Norm, you want to add anything from your previous comment?
Well, just that, you know, if you've got a value proposition, if that's your point, you have to balance your needs of your asset with your needs of your people. So people are absolutely important. You cannot get this done without people. And the reason that we're talking about technology in these sessions is because technology is the how we connect our buildings with our people. So I go back to that idea of this actionable data for our people and actionable information for our end users. That's what we're trying to achieve.
All right, a couple rapid fire questions. What's your perspective on the issue of openness and integration versus proprietary and protected systems? Norm.
Well, you know, at a university, we have an open area network with the 60,000 closest friends, and most of those friends are students who are ready to exploit whatever data we share with them. So we have to live in a very open environment. We have to be able to make these assets strong without breaking the system. So interoperability and cybersecurity are essential to how these work. And, you know, we could go on for hours and hours about that. That's not my expertise, but it's certainly interoperability and cybersecurity have to be balanced in everything we do.
Good. Roy?
I think the, you know, transitioning away from proprietary is going to be key here. It's not very likely that one supplier will be able to do best in class on everything that's going to be needed, right? So the ability to have that open architecture that you can do the plug and play and have that interoperability, again, as the owner allows us to pick the right value proposition for our business, depending on what our needs are, and being able to put together a system that provides the value and helps us run our buildings as efficiently as possible.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, obviously open systems make a lot of sense. I think if Android can figure out how to do it and still be competitive with Apple, we should figure it out in buildings. But I would argue that we should follow the path that's there rather than cut a new path in the woods. This whole IT-OT divide, it's a pretty buzzy conversation. But I think this is one area where we can look to our IT counterparts and say, hey, you guys figured out how to get thousands of systems online communicating with thousands of different users in a safe way. And I think there's lessons there for us in the OT world to make it more reliable.
Great. All right, let's look at a quick call to action. So, and then we're going to dive into just a couple of examples that you all are working on. So what's your call to action to building owners and operators, not to vendors and manufacturers? What's your call to action to building owners and operators? Give people something to be fired up about coming out of here. Mike.
Yeah, humanize it. I mean, We all have specs for our buildings. We all put together really detailed drawings, but gosh, the power of like a one-page RAS guide, reliability, accessibility, serviceability. If you could say what it is you need to say to all your contractors in one page and make one page for each system, I think that would have a lot of impact. You know, going back to what's the human part of this equation, I think that would go really far.
Put it in your contract docs. Right?
Yeah. Yep. And in front of everyone you talk to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Call to action, Roy.
I think, my call to action for the owner operators would be to continue asking for these open architecture systems, right? Continue to help everyone push the envelope. You know, these are things that we need to have, and we're going to need to have them in the not too distant future. Let's continue to push that forward. I know our vendors and suppliers can step up to the table. You know, we've proven it with Android and the iPhone. We need to continue to have the industry hear our voices that this is important, and we need to have this happen.
Uprising. Norm?
Yeah. You know, I think as owners, operators, we need to grow up and stop thinking that the IT guys are going to save us, stop thinking that the vendors are going to save us, stop looking at shiny dashboards and start raising our game in our ability to be able to manage data and configure these devices and get the data out of the systems that we need to operate the buildings. And once we start to look at it that way, I think the vendors and the technology providers, they come with us.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's showcase a little bit of what you all are working on, and then we'll dive into the Q&A. Roy, tell us a little bit about this application you're working on at Kaiser.
Yeah, and mentioned this briefly before, the fault detection and diagnostics cloud-based software. It's been a fantastic tool to have, again, in terms of investment, not as significant as some other things that you might be considering, but it identifies issues in real time. It's running 24/7, 365. It doesn't sleep. It lets you know when you do have issues. There's the ability to do some fine tuning. So once you have it connected to your building initially, you'll have to go through a process of fine tuning because there's some unique things and those can be learned and those can be simulated in the software. The neat thing about this too is it helps to monetize and prioritize, right? We never only have one issue to deal with. There's always multiple things. And again, with limited resources, this really helps our folks in the field understand what are the things they should be working on first, and then what comes next after that. So it's been a big help. In addition to saying, hey, you've got an issue, it's great in terms of saying, hey, here's some potential causes, and allows you to really go deep if you want to. Or oftentimes there's enough information there that the technician's able to get in and understand and correct the problem and get things taken care of. Provides a level of transparency, right? So one of the things I opened up with in this conversation was understanding when change happens. That's the hardest part of my role. This helps me understand that something has changed, what has changed, and is anybody doing anything about it, and who's doing something about it, which is absolutely fantastic. And then lastly, you know, we talked about how the technology enables and how it helps. I get to see the bigger picture, and if we're having issues with a significant piece of equipment in any one of our buildings, and it tends to repeat and repeat and repeat, now I have the ability and visibility. I can go in and facilitate advocacy to maybe replace or upgrade, or to do something more than what normally would be possible through our regular channels. So we're super excited about this tool. It's been super helpful, and I'll turn it over to our next presenter.
Thanks, Roy. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Mike, tell us a little bit about South Landing.
Yeah, so pretty excited to share some fun stuff we've been up to out in Spokane. You know, we've got 2 buildings out of the ground. We actually, like Rick mentioned earlier, there's a virtual opening ceremony tomorrow for the Catalyst building. There's a lot of exciting things about these buildings that we're just not going to talk about today because we're focused on the operational perspective. I want to share some exciting stuff we're doing in that space. But just high level, these 2 buildings are the first of what will be several on a campus just south of the river, south of the Gonzaga campus in Spokane. About 200,000 square feet. The Catalyst building is zero energy, zero carbon wood building, CLT built in partnership with Katerra. And the Morris Center is basically a big battery. It's an all electric central plant. It's got some unique things like thermal storage, phase change tanks, a bunch of really cool stuff. And the goal of that is to help flatten the load profile to the grid while also reducing total energy consumption for the building. So I just want to talk about the use case and the challenge we ran into and how we approached it. There's an intent to develop a dynamic energy model. Rick, if you want to hit the next slide there. The use case here is beyond my understanding. I'll just admit that up front. It's done by people much smarter than me. But the intent at a high level is to create, think of it as a more sophisticated Energy Plus or eQuest model, a physics-based model that represents the way the building was designed. You would create some way to simulate the expected energy consumption of the building in real operations and then feed that with weather data, information from a SCADA system, information from a BMS. And you would use that to simulate the most efficient sequence of operations, not just for the HVAC controls, but what do you do with lighting? What do you do with your EV charger? What do you do with your elevator? What do you do with your thermal tanks? There's a number of different things you would think about. And so from an operations perspective, the way we are contributing to this higher order use case, which is dependent on the integration of these systems, is really focused on that BMS SCADA point. So the graphic on the right, if you think about the design of any system in a building, it kind of looks like this. I mean, this is what we did when we were kids. You have two paper cups and a string tied between them. You can communicate across them. And if you're a company developing a lighting control system or an access control system or what have you, you think a lot about your cup. The reliability, the functionality of that system, how do I make it cost effective? How do I take it to market? You also think a lot about your individual user and the particular uses they have for it. So I'm going to think a lot about my lighting control system and how users need to turn the lighting up and down and how, the shade of the light, the lamp color would need to change, what have you. But when you introduce a lot of other systems, it gets complicated. We tend to neglect the piece in the middle. We think, okay, we've got our system figured out. We've got the use case figured out. Not too worried about the solution in the middle and how they communicate or interact. And that's fine until you introduce all these other things where there's a lot of different systems communicating with different needs. So towards this use case, we have to figure out a way to get in one central repository data that has aligned naming standards, aligned sampling rates, aligned timestamps, a lot of things that are very difficult to get out of any one of them individually. So our solution was really simple. We created a database, a SQL database. SQL databases have been around for quite some time. We reached out to our friends at ATS and said, hey, on that server where we're going to put the virtual server where we're hosting the HVAC control system, can we also throw a little SQL server on there and start dumping a bunch of data into it from these different systems? And then, like I mentioned earlier, we've capitalized the effort to have all of our integration activity, really the task of getting each of these systems to flow into that repository, be part of the construction effort. We've been working on it for months. And so what that will let us do is have a central repository for this use case, for predictive maintenance, for fault detection, for energy monitoring or dashboarding, whatever it is we need to do, all because we've got that repository on day one.
Very cool. Thank you. All right, we're pressed for time here. So Norm, take it away and you guide me as to when to switch over.
Rick, why don't you just go to the jazz hands diagram? My call to arms was let's not get excited about fancy dashboards. So, we've got dashboards, so I don't want to oversell it. Obviously, dashboards are important and they're really useful. Go to the next slide, Rick. Next slide. Okay, so this slide really illustrates what that mess in the middle that Mike was showing looks like for the University of Washington. We've created this is the systems architecture for our campus-wide monitoring and metering system. Basically that supervisory control that brings in all those disparate IoT devices on the left-hand edge of the screen, everything from utility meters to lighting controls to environmental chamber controls to fire alarms to elevator controls, etc. through a system to the other side. And on the right hand, there's all these end uses that we get excited about and where the value is really driven. But my point today that I just want to leave people with is we've learned as operators, all the stuff on the left and the right are only as good as your ability to manage that data through the middle of this pipeline. And that's where the value really resides for the operator, is to be able to get sensible, actionable data from the left hand to the right hand. So I'll leave it there because I've been watching the Q&A. There's really great questions. I'm willing to stay on to talk about this more for anybody who's interested.
Awesome. Let's get to them. Gabe, do you want to start out?
Sure, yeah, we had a couple come in. This latest is kind of an interesting one, acknowledging that most of the people on the call are energy and technology people that like playing with new toys and new technologies and shiny things, where HVAC, most HVAC techs were trained a while ago, and there's a little bit of a disconnect. How do you bridge that gap and simplify systems enough so that it's not just one more complicated thing that HVAC techs need to make sure don't go wrong, right? How do you train them so that they actually can execute?
I want to take this one because we've been working this hard for 5 years. What we've done is we've taken our technicians where they live. We've partnered them with energy engineers and smart vendor representatives from McKinstry, et cetera. And then we've actually attracted our controls vendors. The staff who works on site for our controls vendors gets excited about what we're doing, and we get the best staff from their staff to join us because they're excited about moving on to the operational side and actually owning some of this technology. So I think you got to be positive about that. You need partnership with your vendors, you need partnership with technology providers, but you also need to engage your operators where they're at, get them the information they need, get them excited about the possibility of using data and technology to aid their work, and they come along. They're excited about it.
That's great. Mike, Roy, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Norm wrapped it up very well.
Okay. All right, Gabe, another question?
We had a question come in a while ago. I asked for a little more context, but the one word kind of stuck out to me in terms of metrics. What metrics are you guys using to determine effectiveness?
Yeah, I would love to take that one. So that's a really good question. You know, we tend to think about metrics or KPIs and forgetting the terminology now, but you know, metrics that let you know what is happening now or what will happen versus metrics that reflect back on what have happened. I'm sure everyone on the call remembers the term. I'm forgetting it right now, but we really look for the ones that tell us in near real time, or you know, what are the indicators, early indicators to help us figure it out. And, you know, we pay attention to volume of work orders. We categorize by type. We try to watch spikes of data. I think energy metering data, even when it's miscalibrated, shows you changes day to day. It's not like the calibration is breaking. So until you try and reconcile it, it's still pretty useful. And then I think, you know, there is a human metric that we haven't really been able to put a number to, which I guess doesn't make it a metric. But if you were to imagine like a hot cold spectrum, right, where on one side your tenants are really mad at you and on another side your tenants forgot you even exist, you want to stay warm. So you could imagine a metric where you sit down in your operations meeting and you say, where are we going to put ourselves on the thermometer today? Are we, you know, 70 degrees and comfortable, or is it 50 degrees and icy?
Rick, this is Stan. I hate to jump in, but I must, since we're really at our 1 o'clock closing time. However, we're going to actually formally end the session and stop the recording. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank Rick, who's done a wonderful job of moderating here. But to let our attendees know that the panel has agreed to stay on for a couple of more minutes while Gabe goes through any other outstanding questions that we have here. So we'll leap over into the informal part of the session Now, with my thanks, obviously, to all of our attendees who have to leave us right now, with the encouragement that tomorrow is a day of rest for Smart Buildings Week. We won't have a session tomorrow, but on Friday, please do tune in for our final session, where Microsoft will be providing us sort of a glimpse into the future from their perspective in relationship to where we're going in the smart buildings marketplace. So thanks everybody for attending. It's been great, wonderfully informative session. We'll end the recording now with our thank you.